Ooh, man. Ooh, man. Ooh, man. The Chicago Bears have just hired Ben Johnson, offensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions, to be their new head coach. Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay. This was my preferred choice. It was also the choice I never thought they were going to do. I don't know why. I never thought we were going to get Ben Johnson. It was just, the Bears never get the candidate. And Ben Johnson is the candidate this year. They didn't get Harbaugh. They didn't get Andy Reid. Like, none of the big head coaching options ever come to the Bears. Not because they don't want to. Maybe sometimes they don't want to. But most of the time it's because the Bears just can't get it done. They don't want to bring him in. They don't want to pay him money. This is something different. Now, I did make a video a few weeks ago saying the Chicago Bears have to change. They have to change their philosophies. They have to change what they've been willing to do in the past and back up the Brinks truck for Ben Johnson. And boy, did they. So, okay, let's get a hold of the timeline here. So the Bears did this so fast. Detroit lost 2 days ago in the playoffs, and I think that came up as a big surprise to the people in Hallis Hall because they snuck in an interview yesterday with some random guy who I've never heard of from a college program. I still don't even remember his name or where he's from, but I remember it was just the most random head coaching interview of the cycle so far. But he's a minority, and it's satisfied the Rooney Rule. And then today, first thing this morning, there were flight logs being leaked that Ben Johnson was flying in today for his interview. And then next thing we know, it's being announced that they're getting a deal done, and they never even interviewed him in person. They were just like, okay, let's go. Come on. Wow. So I'm guessing everybody in Hallis Hall was utterly befuddled that the Lions lost as quickly as they did. I'm guessing they were just biding their time for when Detroit's season was over. They probably thought Detroit was going to the Super Bowl, so they were probably dragging out this head coaching search so they could get away with all this. Detroit loses to the Commanders, and then next thing you know, Ryan Poles is like, okay, let's do this. They probably offered him every dollar he wanted to come be head coach of the Bears. They probably moved so quickly in with an offer. I mean, they never even interviewed him in person. This is so unlike the Bears, who usually do 2 in-person interviews for a group of candidates and then pick one from there. That's what they did with Flus. They narrowed it down to Flus and Jim Caldwell and Dan Quinn. Those were our finalists. And now we didn't even have a group of finalists this time. We interviewed everybody once over Zoom, a couple guys in person like Mike McCarthy. Everybody was scared we were going to get Mike McCarthy. And no, today they swoop in. They hire Ben Johnson as soon as Detroit's season was over. First, they had to satisfy the Rooney Rule, and then they moved so fast with this. So Ben Johnson, pretty clearly the preferred candidate by Caleb and the guys in the locker room based on the reaction I'm seeing. He is one of the brightest young minds, offensive minds in the NFL today. He's a guy who led Detroit to top 5 offense in 3 straight seasons with Jared Goff as his quarterback. That's what people don't realize. Jared Goff was his quarterback, and he was putting out numbers like this. And that's no disrespect to Jared Goff, but Jared Goff is not an elite tier quarterback like the usual offenses you're seeing in the top 5. Your Josh Allens, your Lamar Jacksons, guys like that are usually the top 5 offenses. He did it with Goff as his QB. That's something we absolutely cannot ignore. Jared Goff, you know what? Great, very good quarterback. Better than any quarterback the Bears have had in the last decade, but he's not a needle mover. And we saw that in the playoffs. I think he threw like 4 picks, and the Lions still put up like 33 points. So the one thing about Detroit's offense that we are going to have to try to adapt in Chicago is the offensive line. Detroit has probably, bar none, the best O-line in the NFL. And the Bears have a candidate for the worst O-line in the NFL. That's a big difference here. You're going to have to compensate for that somehow. Now, there are ways to get around that, but we're probably not going to be able to see the full Ben Johnson offense with the current layout at O-line. That means you're probably going to have to go for a splash free agent and also take one in the first round with one of your first round picks. Now, Ben Johnson was part of the staff when a lot of the Lions O-linemen were drafted that evaluated those guys, because coaches do evaluations too. You know, the coaches they're part of the draft process as well. Obviously, it's GM more than anything, and big credit to the Lions front office for all of that. But, Ben Johnson can't be ignored. His input, he knows his stuff. Rumor is he's going to bring the Lions O-line coach to come be the offensive coordinator of the Bears. Yes, please. And, I still can't believe they made this hire. I still can't believe they did it, because this is not something the Bears usually do. I mean, I've been begging for an offensive-minded head coach. I begged for one last cycle, and they hired Matt Eberflus. This time around, I was pleading, please hire an offensive-minded coach. And they were spooking me. They were spooking me with visions of Aaron Glenn and guys like that. And I was like, oh boy, this is about to happen, isn't it? And Bears fans were like, oh no, Mike McCarthy would be a good option. And I'm like, would he? Would he really? I know Mike McCarthy's an offensive-minded coach and all, but like, are we really going to John Fox ourselves again into one of these retread head coaches? And it seemed like a very Bears hire. It seemed like a very, safe guy to get. And I really thought the Bears were going to bring in Mike McCarthy, and so did the rest of the fan base based on what I was seeing online. But my goodness, they moved in today and they got their guy. I'm really curious what his personnel groups are going to be, specifically the defensive coordinator. Now, rumor is right now that he's going to bring in Dennis Allen as defensive coordinator. Please. That would be a slam dunk personnel right there. Slam dunk. My chair keeps sinking on me. I just can't believe how fast this happened, A few days ago I was like, man, it might be a couple weeks still before we even get to, because I knew it was going to go until Detroit's season was over before we knew anything about what the Bears were going to do, because so many teams were waiting for Ben Johnson to land somewhere before making their head coaching candidates. I heard a lot about the Raiders, and then also the Jags were interested. Good spots, don't get me wrong. Like, the Raiders are a fresh canvas that was just waiting for Ben Johnson to paint them. And they fired their GM too to make themselves more appealing. A good GM. Tom Telesco is not a bad GM. And they did that to try and make a case for him, and it didn't even work. I'm pretty sure he used the Raiders for leverage. I think the Bears were probably his favorite the whole time, but he never even did in-person interviews with them. So this morning, when it was rumored that he was coming to Chicago for his interview, I was like, man, they better not let him out without a contract. They better don't let him leave the building. And he never even got to the building, and they did this. Oh, man. I really do appreciate the new attitude of go get your guy from the Bears. They did it with Ryan Poles, too. I don't know if you guys remember, but George McCaskey literally drove to the airport to go get Ryan Poles when they were hiring him. That was funny. They brought him in, and, the rest is history. So I'm guessing Ryan Poles is getting extended now if they're letting him do this. I'm sure Ben Johnson wouldn't come to the Bears if there was no transparency on GM there. My goodness, man, this is wild. So now, the Bears have their head coaching vacancy filled with an offensive-minded coach for the first time since Matt Nagy, who was an offensive-minded coach. But the difference between Ben Johnson and Matt Nagy is Nagy only called plays for half a season. Ben Johnson did it for 3 years. Matt Nagy came from Andy Reid, who was an offensive-minded coach and was really the one running the show there. It was his scheme, his personnel, those guys. Ben Johnson is the one running the offense in Detroit. Like, Dan Campbell isn't really calling plays. I don't think he ever has. Maybe a few years ago when he first got there. But Ben Johnson's the one. He's the one in charge of that offense. It's his, that's his baby. And not only that, but Ben Johnson's also just a lot better at calling plays than Nagy was. And that was pretty obvious. This is exciting because I really feel like the Bears are trying to shift their identity here. I think they know that the fans are like, dude, what are you guys doing? Because me specifically, I was making videos saying if they don't get this right, they're going to lose me, and they're losing a lot of people. And that was sentiment I saw online. Like, a lot of people were like, dude, if the Bears screw up Caleb, I'm out. And they were on the track to potentially screwing him up. I still thought Caleb had a pretty good year, but like he was not reaching his potential in that situation. Absolutely not. So I'm really curious to see, first of all, what free agents they pick up, because we have a pretty dire need at O-line, but I feel like the rest of the team is good enough to compete. I mean, our corner group is solid. Our D-line could use another piece, but our linebackers are solid. Our receiving group is solid. Our tight ends are good. Like, it's really just O-line. Like, O-line is, bar none, like, it's the thing to target this offseason. Now, the one thing that's annoying is Detroit, when they built up their O-line, they did it slow. They did it over the course of 2 or 3 years before they finally had an elite offensive line. It took a while. They were patient with it. They let it build slowly over time. The Bears aren't really in a position where they can do that now, because you've got a window forming here of, in a couple seasons, like when Caleb's rookie deal is finally up and all that, like, you have everybody locked up right now. You got the cap space right now, the draft capital right now. You got to lock in right now. So they're going to try and throw in a bunch of new pieces on the offensive line, but the one problem is it's going to take time for that chemistry to develop. I wouldn't be surprised if they brought in 2-3 new starters on the O-line, and I also wouldn't be surprised if the O-line takes a while before it really starts to assimilate. I mean, we got Darnell Wright, who's really good, and that's that. That's kind of it. Like, we got Braxton Jones, who's good, I guess, but he can't stop a bull rush. No center, no interior to speak of now that Tevin Jenkins is a free agent. We have nothing. So I'm interested in seeing the approach that they take. Are they going to load it all up in one offseason, or are they going to try and do it slowly to maximize chemistry while maybe risking Caleb taking more sacks than he needs to? But in the long term, you're going to have the better O-line. They're probably just going to try and build it all up in one offseason. We'll see how that goes. I mean, the Chiefs did it a couple years ago, and I'd say that worked out pretty well for them. I don't know why I'm bringing up the Chiefs like they're anything that the Bears could attain, but this is the first step into becoming more than we've been. The Bears have kind of been a joke. They've kind of lost their identity. People see this logo, and they associate it with failure. In the 2000s, it was different. Not anymore now. You've been jerking around for about a decade now. So, but this is the first step. This is their chance to really bring in their own version of a LaFleur, Shanahan, McVay style head coach, which is something I so desperately wanted, and it's something you need in the modern NFL. That's the model. Strong offensive-minded head coach who can keep his system going. Good eye for coordinators who can, you don't have to worry about him leaving and getting hired somewhere else, which was a problem when you have a defensive head coach. Like, if you have a good offensive-minded OC, he's going to leave. He's going to get a head coaching job. Case in point, Detroit. They're losing both of their coordinators this year because their head coach is Dan Campbell, who doesn't really dip his toe in either of those. He's more of a CEO type, and he's great at that. Don't get me wrong. I would love to have Dan Campbell as head coach of the Bears, but that is certainly a disadvantage to that. Now, with Ben Johnson, can he be that kind of coach? That was a big question. Is he not only, everybody knows he's a good offensive mind, but can he also be a good head coach? Like Mark Trestman was a good offensive mind. This is taking it way too extreme, but Mark Trestman was a good offensive mind, just did not have the personality or the temperament to be a good head coach. But that's kind of the risk you have to take. I'd much rather try than just not even attempt it because of this idea of, like, when they were going with Flus, they were trying to get that head coach style guy who maybe isn't the best scheme, but he's a good head coach, right? And you end up with neither. So with Ben Johnson, he's a good offensive mind. You're comfortable enough with what you've seen and what you've heard that you think he could be a good head coach. I mean, guys like Shanahan and McVay and LaFleur, like, those guys, you don't know if they're going to be good head coaches either. Like, they were just OCs, and they weren't really the voices of their team. Like Kyle Shanahan came from the Falcons as their OC. One of the best offenses. Matt Ryan won MVP. Julio Jones had an insane season. They went to the Super Bowl. And he got hired as the head coach in the Niners from there. But Dan Quinn was the head coach of that team. He was the unquestioned leader. And then you don't know what Kyle Shanahan is. He goes over to the Niners. Turns out he's a really good head coach. So I'm not so much worried about that because I know it can be done. You know, like it's not, there's not a certain type of mold you have to be. As long as he's not like Nathaniel Hackett, like, well, if he can control a locker room, which based off what everything that Detroit players are saying, he can. He expects a lot out of his players. He expects the best out of his players. He's a brilliant mind. I'm really liking what the Bears are doing here. Not only that, he wants to work with Caleb Williams. If he had chosen the Raiders, which rumors were swirling that he was going with the Raiders. Me personally, I think he might have been using the Raiders for leverage more than anything. But if he really wanted to go to the Raiders and he went to the Raiders, that to me would be proof that Caleb isn't the draw necessarily, especially if we ended up with a defensive head coach after that. That was kind of the first alarm bell that sounded for me for Justin Fields, and I still believed in Fields anyway. But when we hired Matt Eberflus, like, we didn't get Brian Daboll or any of the offensive-minded head coaching guys. They didn't really want to come here because you have a quarterback in place who there's a lot of doubts about. He needs a lot of developing, and he doesn't really fit any of their schemes and whatever. So we end up with Matt Eberflus. Not necessarily Justin's fault. I mean, it's also the Bears' fault. But now this to me is Caleb's draw. Like, Ben Johnson he didn't have to take this job. He could have done what he did last year where he passed on all the head coaching vacancies and he chose to stay in Detroit and run it back for another season. They would have loved to have him back, and he still would have been the top of the market head coaching candidate next season without a doubt in my mind. Instead, he chose to take Chicago, where Caleb Williams is already here and so many pieces are already in place. That, to me, indicates that Caleb's the real deal, and everybody in the league seems to think so as well. I'm very excited for this upcoming season. Don't want to get too ahead of myself. But I just can't wait to enjoy the ride. I'm not going to let the Bears fan base talk me into potentially thinking we could win the division, because that's what happened this offseason. I got I believed the hype way too much. But 10 wins, it's on the table. Wild card berth, that's on the table. Caleb Williams developing, should be on the table. Defense, we'll see. I mean, they might regress a bit, but if you're bringing Dennis Allen as DC, I mean, I like it. Certainly better than Eric Washington. I don't know. I'm very. I feel very good about what we're doing in Chicago right now, which is, it wasn't the case before, where I was like, oh, like, we're not going to get Ben, and it wasn't so much Ben doesn't want to come here. That was a little bit of a worry, but to me, it was, did the Bears want him? Because the Bears, they always do this. They always get way too in their own heads, and they think they're the smartest guy in the room, and that's how you end up with guys like Matt Eberflus and Mark Trestman, who nobody, the rest of the league, is even giving a second thought as a head coaching candidate. And then the Bears bring him in, and they're utter disasters. You bring in the guy that, like, just don't think too hard about it. You have an offensive issue, get the best play caller in the NFL right now. Done. We haven't had good play calling in Chicago maybe ever. Like, I can't think of a single season that I've watched where the play calling was good, except for maybe Trestman's first year. Like, it's been a while. So I'm glad that this isn't the same Bears process that we had before. And man, how quickly they moved there too. I still can't even believe that. That didn't feel like the McCaskies to me. That didn't feel like the same old Bears to me. Times are changing a bit. Times are changing a bit. So now, obviously, they need to announce whoever the DC is, whoever the OC is. I think Detroit's probably getting a lot of their offensive staff rated. They're definitely losing. They're probably losing their O-line coach unless they promote from within, which they might do. But yeah, it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be really fun. This season might be like Nagy's first year with all the trick plays and stuff like that. It's gonna be a good season. I'm not gonna get too excited because the Bears did let me down this year quite a bit. But I'm just going in with a excited mindset. It's just gonna be fun to watch. I'm not gonna get too caught up in, they better have this many wins. I'm not gonna get too caught up in Caleb better have this many yards, or we better have this ranked defense, or DJ better have this many receptions. Like, I'm just interested in seeing what they do. It's a fun. I don't know what's going on up there, but it's a fun new chapter for the Bears into a new era, hopefully, where offense reigns supreme. I'm just glad they did this because I don't care about defense. Like, defense, I know they win championships, but they're just not a primary concern for me anymore. I like this. I like this a lot. So yeah, Bears might be back. I mean, I've said that 3 years in a row now, but Bears might be back. Ben Johnson is our new head coach. They got the guy. They fought off all the other teams to get him. Ben wanted to come here. They probably gave him a boatload of money, but they made it happen. Let's go.